Well, good afternoon, everybody, and good afternoon to those watching at home or wherever you are, or on the catch-up for the later recordings on YouTube. We've had a really great question storming session a little bit earlier this afternoon, and we were tackling a really important question: what role should business community play in addressing mental health in the workplace? Question storming is a fascinating process, and I'm sure you'll hear a little bit about that in a moment, about what just happened a moment ago. And then we're moving into the solution storming now, where we take some of those questions and we have a look at them. We've got a great panel of people. I won't introduce anyone except our facilitator, because everyone's going to have a chance to introduce themselves. But let me introduce Sandra Baer from Personal Cities, who's been facilitating both these sessions for this afternoon. Personal Cities based in Washington, DC, and working with businesses all over the globe about how future smart city and environmentally and socially sensitive futures can work for companies. But presently talking to us from Vicenza in Italy, which is one of the few people I know at the moment who's jet setting. So Sandra, over to you. Over to you.
Thank you, Pete. Thank you, and welcome everyone. We're so pleased to have a wider audience to talk about solution storming for this important issue around mental health. I want to give you a little bit of a background about question storming and what this group has done about an hour ago. H.L. Mencken said it best. He said, for every complex problem, there is an answer that is clear and simple and wrong. So question storming is a mechanism to keep questioning, to keep asking a difficult question and not jumping to an answer, not immediately finding solutions to these very complex challenges. 2 years ago, my business partner and I, Dr. Lawrence Jones, wrote a paper on global urbanization. And when we wrote the paper, we learned that if you want to change the world, you have to ask questions that disrupt the world. So we created this idea of question storming and expanded it to say, let's just ask questions and see where that takes us into really finding perhaps different solutions, perhaps solutions never been thought of before. Today, with all the crises in our world beyond the pandemic and income inequality, social and racial injustice, political divisiveness, we have all of these challenges facing everyone. Oh, I forgot the climate crisis. All of these challenges facing all of us that are affecting the ways in which we maybe change and reshape our future life and work. The question today was, as Pete framed it, is what role can business play in supporting mental health issues? What role can the community play in supporting the business addressing mental health issues? And I think the question prompted lots of interesting questions by this group. What I'd like to do is sort of summarize some of the questions that we came up with. But before I do that, I'd like each of the people involved in our session to introduce themselves briefly and perhaps give some insights that they learned from the question storming session. Tony Solomon, can we start with you?
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Tony Solomon. I work in Gloucestershire with the GEM project, which is an employability project supporting people who are facing barriers to getting into work. I'm also a director of Fresh Hope, a charity that runs a number of initiatives around young people and mental health. And I think what came out for me out of the question storming earlier was some big words like culture, honesty, trust, openness, and inclusivity. What is it to have an inclusive culture where people can bring their whole selves to work without fear of their backgrounds or circumstances or anything else for that matter?
Great. And by the way, I should have said that what we're going to do is ask each of the people on the call to give us sort of their immediate insight, if you will. And then what we're going to do again is go around the group here. And if you have suggestions, if you have insights, if you have perhaps actions to suggest, we'll ask you for those as well. Kay Hamblin, can you introduce yourself, please? Give us your insights.
Sorry, I'm Kay Hamblin from 8 Legal. We provide very practical, down-to-earth HR and employment law support for small businesses. We're based in Cheltenham. We work with businesses all around the UK though. And also consultancy services around things like team development, resilience building and culture change. there's so many things that came up today in the conversation that it's really hard to pick out one or two. But I think this whole idea of building a culture from the top of the organisation to the bottom and from the bottom to the top, where there is trust and where the stigma of perhaps talking about mental health has been broken down, but also this idea of where does responsibility start and end for each different sector. So what's the government's responsibility, what's the employer's responsibility, and what's the individual responsibility for their mental health?
Great. Matt Ewald, please introduce yourself.
Thanks, Sandra. My name is Matt Ewald. I serve as Vice President of Education at Chautauqua Institution, a not-for-profit cultural institution in Western New York that throughout its history has brought people together to address major issues of our time, and to do so through multiple lenses and really listening to one another. So you can imagine how invigorating this process has been for me in thinking about how we model dialogue that focuses toward action and civic action. I think for me, as it sounds like for others, just the vast implications of addressing this issue across and beyond business. And then as our questions, as our question storm kind of continued, beginning to think about some of those broader ethical implications of what this would look like in practice at a time where we are continue to learn more and more and have some of our assumptions challenged about mental health, but also at a time coming through a pandemic where this does seem to be more front and center for a lot of businesses, at least being aware of the issue.
Great. Fascinating. Victoria.
Hi, I'm Victoria Lukins, and I run a healthy workplace accreditation program for employers across Gloucestershire. We're funded by the public health team at the local authority, and we work with employers to help them improve health and well-being for their employees. So it was a really interesting session today. One of the areas we cover in our accreditation, as well as physical health, is the mental health side of things. So it was great to hear the insight from others. I think the big questions that stood out for me are around how can we create that culture, and whose responsibility is it to create those cultures where it's okay to talk about mental health, people feel safe, people feel confident and comfortable to talk about mental health in the workplace, and people feel supported, and also where is the link between mental health, mental well-being, and physical health, health behaviours, and all the other aspects of health that can impact on mental health, and should we take a more holistic view?
Great. Grace, please introduce yourself. You need to unmute.
Hello, my name is Grace DeGino. I'm the founder and CEO of INYO International. We are a mission-driven company that focuses on creating and driving social impact, social and economic impact through collaboration. What was most important to me in this discussion was understanding that mental health is vast and addressing the situation is vast. And in that, we look at equity, we look at trust, we look at accountability within ourselves and the accountability of the institutions that we work with and for. And so there's so many things that we can do, so many questions that were raised that I didn't think about that factor into one's mental health. And we all have challenges to some degree. So being able to ask those questions and listen to the questions that were given by many helped me actually to assess what kind of part that I can play to help the people that work for me.
Oh, that's a great outcome. Thank you, Grace.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
to reassess what we can do, right?
Mm-hmm.
Nina,
Absolutely.
Nina, please introduce yourself. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Nina Reeves, and after many years as an academic researcher in the human-centered design of IT systems, I'm now doing something completely different, which is leading courses in life skills for CAP, which is Christians Against Poverty. And mental health issues have been identified as a major problem for those experiencing debt problems. So one of the things I've done recently is a course called the Sanctuary course, and it's one of the main themes which came from that, and I thought was also reflected in the questioning, was that mental health is a continuum. So all of us go from, we range between languishing with poor mental health to flourishing in good mental health. And so I think all those questions for me were crystallizing how we get from languishing to flourishing, and what position, what the business community can do to assist that process.
Well, I love your words, languishing to flourishing. That's great. Maybe we should create a new vocabulary for some of this. Sam Holliday, please introduce yourself.
Yes, thank you, Sandra. Yes, my name's Sam Holliday. I'm the Development Manager for the Federation of Small Businesses, otherwise known as the FSB, which is Britain's biggest business representation group, covering every type of business in every type of sector. And in many ways, I found this whole debate really good, because I don't think we'd have had this debate 10 years ago. I don't think mental health issues were on the agenda. Before I joined the FSB, I was a boss myself. I had quite a lot of people working for me, and they had all manner of mental health issues, and I didn't actually feel like I knew what to do. When I had my own struggles, I didn't know where to turn to, and I think it was a very, very tricky time. But I think, although it may not seem it, we're getting better and better at talking about this, about knowing the questions to ask and knowing where to turn to. And the FSB as an organisation is very committed to this. We've got our own FSB Wellness and Mental Health Hub, which anybody's allowed to look into. And we've seen a big rise over the last 12 months in our members contacting us for support in this area. It's enormous, it really is. And I think the more that we're all equipped to be able to deal with it, the better. And I come from a point of view that we've got to support employers in this, because they're out of their depth. We can't impose too much on them, particularly smaller business. Smaller business owners are passionate about their employees. They don't want to lose them. They only have small teams very often, and they can't afford to lose people. So they do everything they can to look after them. But some of this stuff can get very, very heavy, very, very quickly, and they don't know what to turn. So I was encouraged by some of the thoughtful and thought-provoking questions I heard, and I'm actually quite optimistic, because at least we're talking about it now, whether it's because it's celebrities, whether it's because of royals. This subject is now open and debated and taken seriously, but we've still got a long way to go. So I found the questions very, very interesting and a lot of insight. So I've learned a lot already. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Sam. Maybe it's one of the, how do you say it? One of the unintended consequences of one of the unintended benefits of COVID. That, things have changed the way we live and work, and maybe some of the tough parts have caused us to be more aware. That's probably the wrong way to frame it. I just thought I'd throw that out. Jane, please introduce yourself. You're muted.
Sorry, is that me?
No, I was saying Jane, but either James or Jane, either one.
Sorry, didn't quite hear you, Sandra. We just
I'm sorry.
Please introduce yourself. So sorry about that. As everyone else has said, a really, really interesting discussion. I think from the perspective, particularly of small businesses, as Sam just said, there's a real issue about how and whether or why they can help staff and managing the issue of mental health. And I think there's a real fear too. And I think many of the questions that came out of it were about, alleviating the issue and managing the issue, not just from a smaller community, but from a macro community viewpoint as well, because I think it's probably bigger than just the FSBs. But yeah, it was really interesting discussion.
Great. And James Weaver, please introduce yourself. Welcome back.
Sorry, I was late joining. James Weaver, WPA Healthcare Practice. As I say, well, what I do for a living is I put people in hospital. Work for an insurance company, and we look after people's health. So they're rather than having to wait in a waiting list, they can go and get treated straight away. WPA has just launched a health and wellbeing hub on our website, and has also introduced remote benefits to all of our members, so they can speak to a mental health counsellor 24/7. And we've also just introduced structured counselling into most of our private client plans and a lot of the corporate ones as well. So and I've seen I've seen this change over the last year or so. And as you said, actually, Sandra, COVID has really sort of brought about some fundamental shifts in the way that we've been trying to support our members. The session that we had earlier on, I found incredibly useful, and it's certainly a format that I'm going to try and implement with some of the teams that I'm a member of, because I could really feel the barriers coming down after a little while. People asking those questions that maybe, if they were under a bit of pressure to ask it, but because everybody was firing the questions in, you just say it. And it was quite, and I like that. I like that. It's sort of, there's a lot of creative stuff that came out of it. And yeah, thanks very much.
Oh, I'm so glad you joined, and thanks to all of you. I guess one of the things that we learned from question storming is that we're taught to give answers. We're taught to be smart, especially once you become an adult. You're in a profession. You're teaching. You're coaching other members of your workforce. You're taught to have the answer, and I think for most of us, it's if we don't have the answer, like, well, why not? So that's what question storming, I think, helps us get over. And hopefully, as many of you mentioned, fear or, this lack of trust or sort of an unwillingness to look at this bigger picture. I think Grace said it, this issue is vast and so complicated, but perhaps the questioning gives us the ability to see a problem through the lens of others. And I think especially, I think most of the people on this call are from Shelton or parts of England and the UK. There are 2 folks here from the US. But really, once you do this with people from all different cultures, ages, I recommend that people do question storming and involve adolescents, involve young children even, involve the millennials and get the Generation Z ideas about what this is about. We've also done question storming sessions with LGBTQ folks and people, veterans that have fought in wars, for example. They have different perspectives, and it's often hard to get disadvantaged communities involved in these question storming sessions, but to the extent that you can do it, I certainly recommend it. What I'd like to do now is actually go with each of you again one more time. If you can come up with maybe a suggested action. And I'm not looking for specific answers, but based on what you've talked about, that it's about culture and it's about trust and it's about a holistic way of looking at this. Are we asking too much of employers, or are we asking too little? I think when you said, Sam, that a lot of the employers are out of, they're just out of their depth. And I think we can all understand that. We are not all, some of us on the call actually are, but we are not all mental health experts. So what is what's an action we could take to deal with some of these ideas, to build resilience, to build a better future for how business especially supports mental health problems? Anybody want to kick it off? I won't call on you.
I'll start, if you like.
Oh, you go.
Go ahead, Victoria.
Second.
So from my perspective, I think the cultural thing, it starts with leaders and managers actually putting things into action. So it's not about what they say, it's about being seen to be doing things that starts to foster that trust and that culture. But it's everyone's responsibility really to take those actions into the workplace.
Can you give us some examples of what you might see as an action?
So I think if you're talking about reducing stigma around mental health, and you know, making it okay for people to seek help in the workplace and to talk about their mental well-being in the workplace, then managers need to speak openly and honestly with people. They need to bring it into their appraisal systems, their one-to-one systems, those conversations, and make sure that staff are informed and consulted along the way as to why they're having these conversations. And the benefits, and alleviate those fears and let them speak freely about any fears or reservations they have. And then, you know, make sure that they demonstrate. And I think, you know, giving case studies, giving examples as well of where somebody's been supported in the workplace, they've been supported through a problem, they've been supported to perform, you know, and supported and helped. I think that that's really strong and really powerful, and making sure you're talking about those things. I also think it's that promoting self-care. So senior leaders making sure they're seen to be looking after themselves as well, looking after their own health and well-being. So if you're telling people we're trying to do something around stress in the workplace, we know stress is a problem, and then you've got a senior leader who's sending emails at 10 o'clock at night to their staff to ask them to do something for the next morning. So it's that kind of thing. If you're going to talk about that and find out why people are stressed, you need to have those behaviours, make sure you set those boundaries, those cut-off points, and actually act on that.
Yeah, those are good examples. I feel like there's a whole storytelling change in society. You know, tell me a story about this. Give me an example. Tell me, when Sam talked earlier about some of his insights, I think, you know, saying that he didn't know where to turn to when he had a problem. And you know, most of us are in that same boat, but we don't express it. We don't talk about it. So maybe that case study idea could be incorporated somehow in the business world.
And the other thing is ask for help. So if as a leader or a manager you don't know what to do and you are struggling and you don't know how to respond, there is resources out there, there's training out there, there's organizations that can support with mental health, with resources, with signposting, knowing what to do and how to react, and yeah, ask for help.
Great, good ideas. Who else?
Yeah, so I'll go next if you like. Yeah, so there's quite a lot of legislation around this anyway. We've got, you know, Mental Health Act, we've got the Anti-Discrimination Act, we've got I'm sure Jane and Victoria would tell us a few other acts that there are as well. So for when things get too far, I think we've probably got some pretty adequate legislation there. I think really what we need to be looking at is the other end of it, about sharing best practice. I think one of the questions was, what does good look like? So just finding one of those environments where somebody's really getting it right, where they're really nailing it. And it's not a one size fits all. I don't think that any one particular company is going to have all the bases covered. But as a community, we could certainly look for companies or businesses or communities that are doing it well, doing certain things right, and then trying to identify that, trying to capture some really, really useful data, and then communicating and educating the wider community.
James, who would own that? Who would be responsible? When you say look in the community, I mean, there's no your organization perhaps, but I'm just saying when we say look for best practices, you know, it's sort of like an amorphous thing for me.
Well, I think maybe,
how do you see that?
I mean, yeah, so capturing that, I mean, you know, you might well, it might be an event or something like that, or it might be some kind of a focus group or whatever. It's just, I mean, the FSB might be one way. They're an organ which could be used to communicate to a bunch of different businesses. Yeah. And you could ask people, you know, don't tell us about your challenges, tell us about your successes, tell us about what's going really, really well for you.
Got it.
What lessons have you learned, you've implemented, acted on, and had really, really positive results?
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
How would it work? Let me just follow up on that a little bit. How
Sure.
would it work? You know, a lot of you are from Cheltenham, but that's one community.
Yeah.
You know, and forgive me for not really understanding the crazy geography over there. You know, if you're in the Cotswolds or you're not in the Cotswolds, and forgive me. But would there be sort of, Sam Holliday, would there be sort of a, as James just suggested, maybe a business group that would take ownership of something like that?
Yes, potentially, but I don't think we need to think about a physical space anymore. I mean,
No.
you're in Italy.
Yeah,
Matt
good point.
and Grace are in America, and you know what? We did a physical event down in Bath, which is another area I cover, about mental health. And I was expecting maybe a round table of about 10 people, and we had like 60 odd people sign up, which is wonderful. But, and this is crucial, I would estimate that only 40 of those turned up. And I think if you are struggling perhaps with mental health or whatever, or it's harder to physically go to a place and be identified amongst a group of people than it is maybe to do something which is a lot more anonymous online. So I don't think we need to think about physical spaces anymore. I think, you know, we're not ready yet in this country. I don't know what it's like in America, but we're not ready yet to go out and do many physical events. So I think this could be done virtually.
Just drawing a line under what I was saying, there are things like there's a customer engagement forum, and there are forums out there, and they hold online events, and there's no reason why we couldn't have a similar sort of forum where, you know, we could look to, you know, the FTSE 500 or whatever, you know, we could look to a certain level of business. And just see what we could do. The other area that was quite interesting to me as well was the way that technology could be used. So I was chatting to a guy the other day, you know, who's got a really great app that they've just launched, you know, where every employee of the business can log on to their app in the morning. They say, how am I feeling? You know, and then they can then recommend some, you need to do some desktop Pilates, or you need to go and have a meditate, or you're not sleeping well enough, or whatever it is, they can suggest that. So there's that kind of technology is out there at the moment, and it'd be interesting to see how that could be leveraged to make, well, to do two things. One thing would be to extract some really good data about how people are feeling. You know, what is the overall mental health of a workforce, or as a, but at the same time as well, then give those individuals, because also the other thing that was said was there isn't a one size fits all, so everybody needs to have a. Anyway, I could waffle on for ages. Actually, I'll shut up now and leave it open. But I just thought that was an interesting, one of Matt's questions actually.
I might, if I just could briefly build on what James is saying, if that's okay. And Pete, I realize I jumped in front of you, but there is something that James touched on in the, you know, one size doesn't fit all. And that is both true. And I think we also can at times make assumptions that within our particular business sector or industry, we are so unique and face such unique challenges that we're not thinking about how we look at this more broadly, right, across industry. And while I feel like I'm touching on some points that have been expressed, for me, it's these conversations can be looking at far-reaching solutions, which are incredibly powerful, but it also comes back to the very moment we are both in. Some may feel we're coming out of, but we are still very much still in. And how do we keep this kind of front of mind and not miss it is an opportunity that from this trauma and pain and loss, we learn. And so I think this is also about big solutions, wide-ranging solutions, and small steps. And so for me, it's, you know, how everything from what are some of those bigger studies out there that can help us begin to identify some learnings and maybe point to where there's actually far more in common that businesses and organizations have than we may think. And but here's what learnings have we discovered from this moment that we need to get down and better understand, so that we don't come out of this. We all have short-term memory, and there is also, with the trauma, there's going to be a moment, and it may be a different timing for different parts of the world, where there is a kind of joy that can come with, oh, I can physically embrace people again. But we don't want to lose this moment to better understand, and I would say, small steps and big steps. And I have a little signal that my internet connection is unstable, so if you can't hear me, raise your hand. How are we engaging our employees? Okay. How are we engaging our employees right now? Hearing from them. This can't be a top-down approach to addressing this issue. We really need to understand, what do our employees at every level, and however we may be formalizing how we value employees, how can they help shape and own certain practices within an organization? But the last thing for me is this, what I imagine will be the case already, but these larger studies that can do the very thing we're doing today, which is not focusing on just one part of the world, not looking at just one particular industry, but give us some understanding of what we've been through, and maybe some things we can put into practice.
Who could own
Leadership.
that, Matt? Who could own that, Matt?
I don't know. I think the United Nations, for example, has, that may not be the example when it comes to business, but it's a global reaching organization that has prioritized mental health, by the way, even within their own employee base. The idea that senior UN officials are talking openly about how trauma has affected them is modeling an opening up of dialogue around those issues. But I do think it's, the key here is going to be getting beyond competitive practices and thinking about how business and government and maybe others can learn from this.
You probably get more engagement from
Tony,
Facebook.
I think you had a comment. Oh, go ahead, James.
I was going to say, you probably get more engagement from a body like Facebook, or something which is not government owned, or so says they're not government owned anyway.
Leadership,
Tony,
accountability.
I think, and Pete, go ahead. Oh, sorry, Grace. Go ahead, Grace, then Pete, then Tony. How's that?
Okay. Leadership accountability is very critical. And what I mean by that is that we spend most of our time in the office, right, during the day. And the environment that a leadership creates sets the tone for its employees. And so when you have situations where the leadership may be dealing with mental health challenges, that greatly can impact the tone and atmosphere of the staff in so many different ways. So when we talk about evaluation systems and tools for employees to be able to give feedback, we as leadership must be very strategic in how we respond to people, because if you don't feel that you're taking the responses of the employee seriously, it would have an adverse impact on the whole office. Sometimes when we're doing evaluations, we're like, okay, whatever, 20 people can complain about a leadership person, right? But the top people do not do anything about it. But they're not understanding the mental health impact it has on the whole operation of your office. So it's very important the systems that we put in place to evaluate when employees provide feedback and there's more than 2 or 3 employees saying the same thing, we have to assess the leader or leadership in the organization, because that has a vast impact, I use vast again, on the mental health of an office and an institution overall.
Yeah, thank you. Pete, Alison, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. So there's a couple of things about this for me that start coming together a little bit as threads. We somewhere back in the question storming, we tied up a connection between mental health of individuals in the workforce and the business resilience that gives the business that's owning it. And that statement also does apply to other areas we look at, and diversity and inclusion is one, and there are others as well. And it strikes me that just picking up on the discussions earlier about having a space, whether that's a virtual space or a real space, somewhere where people can go and draw on resource. Actually, what we may be looking at here from a business language perspective is to create that space which can help support business resilience, and actually that would potentially have a number of angles to it, and we won't get distracted by the other angles. But if we stay with mental health, we're talking about a space and a resource there where where business owners could come, not necessarily saying I'm suffering from mental health, but might saying I'm not sure I'm dealing with mental health very well in my workforce, or I've got this agenda, or I've got whatever it is. But also workforce members could arrive and say, look, I'm really struggling because I'm not getting on well with my employer. Now, this would be a confidential environment, but one of the values would be that it would create resource to draw on. But the other value, of course, is that it would be receiving intelligence about what's going on in businesses, in workspaces. It does strike me that we in the UK here, just for the benefit of those not in the UK, the way the government works and interconnects and communicates with with business units is through a thing called the local enterprise partnerships, which we are well engaged with here. We have a version of that called G First. It's not my place or our place to speak on behalf of G First and suggest they do things, but actually they, in Gloucestershire anyway, and it is a bit rare in the UK, but they have a physical space as well. So if you just imagine for a second that G First as a local enterprise partnership took that baby, then it could create very easy to access routes, whether that's somebody suffering and wanting to talk, or whether that's a business, large or small, wanting to express a view or find resource. Now there are a number of those on this call far better connected into the LEP than I am, but it strikes me that might be a useful thing held under the banner of business resilience, which of course is prima facie a space that the Gloucestershire Local Enterprise Partnership would be looking at. So you go. That was what was coming to me as a bringing it together kind of thought.
Tony, go ahead.
You're muted, Tony.
I'm really quite hopeful. In the UK, we've been banging on for as many years as I can remember about something called work-life balance, which most people would agree is good for your mental health. And yet I'm yet to meet a person who can put their hand up when I ask, have you got your work-life balance sorted? As part of our discussion earlier, we were talking about people spending long hours sitting in front of screens, not taking breaks, their keyboards full of sandwiches because they eat lunch at their desks, and all those behaviours which I can only suggest are not good for your mental health. If we learn from COVID and we learn from the flexibility that it's afforded us and the ability to work from home or office or blended approaches that suit the individual circumstances, I believe we've got every chance of more and more people benefiting from true work-life balance. But having said that, it's going to require a major shift in the way we lead and manage, because managers tend to like to manage people who sit at their desks 12 hours a day looking busy. Now, why should it matter to you as a manager what I do and how I do it, providing I deliver what it is you expect of me on time and on budget? And that's a whole mindset shift in that sort of management textbook, if you like, that we need to go through to really enable people to be the best that they can be, without that sort of something on their back all day long of almost somebody watching over them.
Tony, I want to pursue that a bit because, excuse me, who would own that? Who would, again, I get back to some kind of an action, some kind of a story you can tell us that, you know, how would we go about shifting that mindset, really?
Well, it's got to come from leadership. I mean, in our own organisation, we're talking to each individual member of staff at the moment about what's going to work for them going forward in and around their children, their families, and so forth. And we're talking with management, as management, about how we manage the work that needs to be done. And what are those things we're really measuring?
So give us an example. Give us an example, because maybe 30% of the workforce will continue to work from home in different cities around the world. Give us an example of how the mind shift for managing people would change.
Well, if I were managing this group here, the nice thing is I come in the morning, I'm in my office, and I look out at you lot sitting there, and I can see who's in on time, who's early, who seems to be working hard, and I can be making judgments all day long. I can get what I want when I want it, but at your expense. But in the future, if we're clearer about what it is I'm expecting you to do and achieve, and I'm giving you the resources and support you require, I need to trust you. And one of the reasons we haven't worked from home in the past is simply we do not trust employees to do anything that slouch around in their pajamas playing PlayStation. But we've learned enormously that being at home or being in an environment which is comfortable for you is hugely more productive than sitting, well, not to everybody, but for many.
Got it. Kay, I think you had a comment. Go ahead, Kay.
Yeah, well, there's a couple of
and
things.
And then Nina, and then Jane.
It's kind of fed in from, Pete brought up the resilience word, and then I think it does follow on from what Tony said as well. So I think resilience is a real buzzword in the UK employment world. I think it's really misused sometimes, because I think it can be used as a stick to beat people with when they have mental health problems, that they just need to man up and be a bit more resilient. But where I think it links into what some of the other things have been said is that my understanding is that resilience has various building blocks, and they're things like connectedness and good communication, self-care, attitudes like optimism, and also personal resources. So things like something called self-efficacy, which I think it's like the poor relation of resilience, but it's about that feeling of having agency and control over how things go in your life. And I think that relates to what Tony was just saying about giving people some autonomy and control over how they do what they do. And I think that's massively beneficial for mental health for most people. Now, I know somebody who's really struggling with their mental health might not be able to cope with some of that autonomy and control, but I think the more we can empower people and give them whatever level of control is possible over the work that they have to do, then that does help to build resilience and build mental health and build that positive mental well-being. That's my feeling.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the autonomy idea has two edges, right? Some people love it, some people need more direction or more control. So, Nina, what was your comment?
Well, I think carrying on from what Tony was saying and just what you were saying, I think a crucial word here is listening. Being able to listen to your workforce. And as an example of what Tony was saying, having worked in universities for more years than I care to remember, the universities used to be very good at this. You had a lot, as an academic, you had a lot of autonomy to create to do the kind of research you wanted to produce publications. And they then began to introduce a lot of measures, and they sort of tailorized all the activities so that the students became a sausage machine, you know, students in, student outcomes out, and it was all about the student experience. And the more they did that, and the more they put the staff into large open plan offices where they couldn't actually engage with the students on a one-to-one basis, which is what the students actually wanted, then the mental health aspects deteriorated. And this has been documented and so on. And I think we need to think again about this autonomy idea and negotiate, listen and negotiate with staff as to what is their most effective way, not necessarily the most efficient way, but the most effective way for them to work. And I think that's one way in which we could improve their mental health outcomes. The other thing is, one thing that came to me while I was having my tea break was that we didn't mention the arts at all. And I think there could be a question. I know a lot of creative teams in the computing area. They would have Friday afternoon pie shops, they would call them. I don't know why, but they would allow staff who were designing websites usually to have Friday afternoon where they could work on any kind of creative project that they wanted. And this was immensely valued by those creative types. So maybe it needn't necessarily be art, it could be music, but it could also be the physical things that we were talking about, you know, walks, sport. We mentioned all these things during the questioning.
Yeah, I like that idea. And I like your articulation of it, sort of making the case for trusting people to be creative, trusting them to be autonomous, trusting them to be effective, as you say. I like that. Jane, I think you were next, and then Victoria.
Thanks, Sandra. Yeah, I mean, I think the word trusting keeps coming up, and it's a really important thing because trust is a two-way thing. And I think that the reason that we struggle with mental health quite often is because staff are loath to raise it because they don't trust the people that they're about to raise it to, their managers or the directors, whoever it is in the organisation. They've got to tell about their issue. So mental health in the workplace is still an issue because people don't know who to talk to about it. They can go to the doctor and get signed off. They can get some help that way, but getting signed off, if you get signed off for stress or you get signed off for poor mental health, there's an immediate distrust issue that people are avoiding coming to work from the other viewpoints. So it's one of those things.
How could we, let me push you a little bit. How could we build trustworthiness? I think James Weaver talked a bit about that using technology. Pete talked about it through the LEP, the local partnerships. How could we build trust into helping people feel safe again?
The process has already been started by allowing people to work from home. And I think we can build on that. You know,
okay.
We've got lots of people in the UK working from home now that never did before because managers didn't trust them to. Now they've proved that they can and do. The next step is to prove that, you know, your 99.95% of your staff are great and they're never going to cause you any problems. So if they've got a mental health issue and they get signed off by the doctor, it's because there's something wrong. It's not because they're avoiding coming to work. Trust them the same way that we had to when we sent them home from work at the start of COVID. My solution.
Right.
If I could just add quickly.
Yeah, no, I like the answer.
I just think what Nina,
Matt.
I think it was Nina who had addressed when it comes to the role of the arts, that's also part of trust, because if it is structured in such a way that's saying, look, we are valuing you not just as an employee, but as a person, but we also know that even when it comes to business basics and productivity and what we're able to accomplish, this is valued. That's also a part of trust where it's not dictating, so all of us are going to do this exact thing, but we're saying, look, what we want to carve into as a percentage of your overall time is your being able on your own terms explore that creative side or immerse yourself in the arts or community work of some kind. I don't know, I would bring those together around this issue of trust.
Yeah, I like that. Victoria and then James.
So I was going to say it's empowering your employees. That word came up. The word trust is coming up a lot. And I think sometimes the key is absolutely communication, and that works two ways: the listening side of communication, as well as the messages that you put out there, but also individuality, treating everybody differently. Everybody needs something different. So if you're going to empower one person, it may be that you give them flexibility, freedom to just go away, do their job, you trust them to get on with it. To empower another person could be they need lots of check-ins, they need lots of praise and encouragement, they need support, they need an infrastructure, so everybody needs something different. So I think, the key to getting it right can be, because it's such a complex issue, there's no one answer. It's looking at the individual, looking holistically at every individual in the workplace, fostering those relationships in the right way, getting the communication right, and that's the way you'll build the trust, and that's the way you'll empower your employees, and get them to become resilient and hopefully have a resilient workforce. Not quite as simple as that, it's complex, but those are the steps, I think.
Thank you. James, you had a point?
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. You say one thing and everybody else talks, and loads of other things come to mind. So yeah, I was thinking a lot about, because my previous lives, I was very much involved in customer communication management and the big data piece, and how that influences the way that you communicate with individuals. And the thing is with there is that you can't boil the ocean. There isn't, although as Matt pointed out, there isn't one size fits all, but you need to work out either t-shirt sizes or something like that. So it's something where you can build a persona around a particular type of person, whether or not they need help, they find it difficult to ask for help, and have some kind of having that sort of a process or template that a company could use in a positive way, because you could then build stronger teams, because you might have somebody who's very, very level-headed, got no mental health issues or whatever, great educator, good listener, working with somebody that needs to be in a supportive environment. So yeah, so it's almost like using a vertical marketing sort of ploy to deal with mental health. And the other thing I was thinking about as well is that obviously employees are the internal customer of the company, and a lot of companies will put a lot of effort into their customer services to look after their external customers, but they don't necessarily have that internal customer other than the standard review. But then you go to a big company and you talk to an employee and you say, when did you last have your review? And they'll say, oh, I missed the last one, I missed the one before that, and they don't get done on time. So it's all very well having the systems in place, but you've still got to use them, I suppose. I don't know so not exactly a solution, was it? That was more of a
right.
a thought vomit.
Sam, and then Kate.
Yeah, James is absolutely right. So many things are cropping up. Every time someone speaks, you want us to talk about something else. But I did want to address the concept of working from home, because that has become such a big thing over the last 12 months. And I think it isn't all black and white, I'm afraid. Now, the Times, British paper, the Times, did a survey in September, October, and 50% of the people who have been made to work from home said they like it and they want to continue doing that. That dropped to 25% by January, February. Suddenly the weather's not so good anymore. You've been doing it for too long. And I think with the working from home, I mean, I've worked from home pretty much over the last 8 or 9 years. I'll get out quite a lot. I'm quite lucky. I've got a spare bedroom that's converted to an office. Great. My son lives in Bristol in a shared accommodation. He lives in one room. It's awful for him. And I think we have to, and I think I do like Jane's concept that a lot of employees are showing trust by allowing people to work from home. A lot of employers, I'm afraid, are a bit more cynical than that. Some of the bigger businesses are making people work from home because it's saving them a fortune. And I think that is going to negatively affect a lot of people's mental health. So coming back to what Victoria was saying, there is no broad stroke to this. It's about that communication. It's about saying to an employee, do you want to work from home? If not, how often can you come into the office? and trying to get that right balance. And in terms of the overall, how we get this message out, Tony Blair very famously once said, education, education, education. And that's where it starts. And there's a phrase I like, which I think applies whether you're talking to a children in nursery or kindergarten, or you're talking to an employee. It's okay not to be okay. I think that's a wonderful thing for a parent or a teacher to be able to say to a child, and then use that throughout business and business life. And if you've got a poster in every office or every virtual office saying it's okay not to be okay, you're almost therefore opening the door to people to be able to talk about these issues. And that's where the education comes in. Employers need educating, employees need educating to know that it's okay to talk about these things. But I do think we talked about this earlier, how COVID has opened some positive doors, and it really has, but it's opened some potentially negative ones as well. I do know a family member that is going to have to start working from home, works for a bank. Absolutely, mental health has gone to pieces. The thought that they're not going to interact with young people again. I think there's a demographic in here which we've not really talked about. I think this has been tougher on younger people. They're less likely to die from COVID, but economically they are massively the most affected in terms of their education, in terms of their career prospects. And now we're telling them they might even be able to go into the office to see their friends and work with their friends. Big issues. So there's no one size fits all.
Kay, you're next, and then I want to ask a question of the group for our closing idea. Go ahead, Kay.
There's been about 6 different things that have come into my head all along. So it started with James saying about performance reviews, and the facetious comment came into my head is like, when did you last meet an employee who actually has a positive thing to say about a performance review? Because most people hate them with a passion. I think what Sam was just saying about people missing that connection in the workplace, we're talking about communication. And I think if people are working remotely, you lose all of that informal, light touch communication that is so important in building that feeling of connection, feeling part of something. And also quite a lot of just the little inspirations. You might be just having a chat about something random and something just pings together. And that's not going to happen in a formal meeting, because you're not going to have the formal meeting with that person. And oh golly, what else was there? I better shut up. One last thing was that years ago I worked with a guy who was a professor at Cambridge Business School, and he talked a lot about trust. And his simplest thing about trust was that you've got to give it to get it back. You can't wait until you trust somebody almost. You just have to trust somebody. Yeah. And if you trust somebody, usually they'll live up to your expectations. And if you don't trust them, then you're never going to build that trust. And so it was that, you know, it was this, you've got to be generous with your trust and give it. And that's how you build it. I'll shut up now.
Sandra?
I like that closing thought. Matt, one comment, and then I'm going to run an idea by all of you. Go ahead.
One of the things that came up in our question storming was recognizing that none of this happens within a vacuum. So we may be able to do everything we think is possible and best in the workplace, but it's what is that experience for that employee in the home, in schooling that leads, you know, what kind of training. So that's all to say, it's also about connections. And so one of my ideas is, you know, how do you begin to formalize some of these partnerships? What would it mean for a business as part of articulating its values is the kind of partnership they form with certain, you know, undergrad, you know, I'm using American examples, but, you know, certain undergraduate or graduate programs in certain, or even trade schools, right? So we don't even begin to assume that we're talking about a certain quote unquote type of employee or profession. But, you know, from that to thinking about other community partnerships. So it does come back to this holistic kind of response to mental health.
Yeah, I like that as well. I wanted to run this idea by you. It came to me as an insight while during the question storming session. So all of you know, I think now, that I work with cities around the world, and recently had conversations with Lily May, M-E-I. She's the mayor of Fremont, California. Fremont, California, you may or may not know it, it's in the Bay Area near San Francisco, was recently voted to be the happiest city, one of the happiest cities in the United States, and also the fourth most caring city in the United States. Now, we could go on and on about how those measures were developed, but I guess what I'm hearing from some of you, talking about communicating, educating, measuring, forming new coalitions, forming new collaborations. Maybe part of it is that we could, do a better job of understanding the challenges of mental health and maybe measuring the positive parts of it. What do you think of that? Is it possible?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, there's a lot to be said, and a lot in my experience, networking, sharing good practice, getting businesses and communities to talk to each other about their successes. You can learn a lot from that, and that can have real benefits and strengths. Just what we've learned today, sort of getting a mix of people with different backgrounds, different experiences in a room to throw ideas around, can make some huge differences. So yeah, absolutely. I think reading sort of some of impact studies on the benefits of addressing health and well-being in the workplace, some of the global studies that have taken place and the UK studies, we are starting to get some tangible data around productivity, around staff retention, sickness absence. There's some hard measures there, as well as some soft measures which are more difficult to ascertain. But yeah, there's definitely more work to be done, but I've seen starting points there that we can build on.
Great. Anybody else?
I was going to say, I think one of the things that we could do proactively would be to engage with business coaches and consultants, because their real drive is to help businesses to improve. And if they can look at the improvement in the mental health of the workforce of that particular business, then so I think that would be certainly. Be it some best practice, a white paper, a blog, art, something to draw in the consultant and the coaching community, I think would be a positive way. And just to also to let you know that I'm the fourth most caring person in my family, just to put that out there.
Only 4 of you, yeah?
Yeah, how big is your family?
There are 7 of us.
Okay.
One thing about COVID, it has enabled us to talk in smaller groups with people that we hadn't conversed with, different industries, different professions in years, right? And one of the number one issues that we've talked about is mental health. And I don't have a background in mental health, and neither do the other people that I had spoken throughout this year. And so when, Sandra, you just mentioned about collaborative efforts, I think that is a great opportunity. Smaller groups, little charrettes within people you know, people you don't know, invite people around, work with organizations within your community to go into the communities that we normally don't go in, to talk about mental health issues, because some people think they have a picture of someone who looks like they have mental health, but they don't look at the professional person who seems to be happy every day, who are dealing with those type of challenges. So when you meet in those little small groups and you collaborate with other organizations and other people, you learn and you help people through this process.
Grace, I love what you've just shared, because it also flips this model, right? We talked earlier in our question storming about what's the role of government and policy, and that's this kind of top-down approach. But what you're talking about is something very organic, about collaboration and learning happening at the smaller scale, and that's where you get buy-in. So it's not, okay, we get that now we have to change our policies, roll my eyes, what's this going to mean for the company? No, it's people to people, it comes back to trust, building that kind of trust, that begins to demonstrate, I don't need a kind of higher policy to dictate those terms. We're doing it because from our smaller conversations, we know it's going to have, or we believe it can have a positive impact. I love that.
Yeah, just
Tony, last comment.
I heard recently somebody saying that, you know, going into a bookshop, there is row upon row upon row of books about self-help, but absolutely nothing about helping others. And in terms of good mental health and mental well-being, helping others, and I do a lot of this with volunteers in the organisations I'm involved with, is massively beneficial. Putting out there, recognising you're not the only one in the world who has difficulties, and yet there's very little written about it compared to it's me, it's me, it's me. Let's make me better.
Tony, maybe that's one of your next steps, is to write that book.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I want to thank all of you for joining us today. I think for all of the people that hear our discussion in the solution storming session, I think we've generated some valuable ideas and some insights for their future action. I definitely want to, as a call to action here, I want to encourage each of you to try question storming in your community, at your workplace, with your family. Just try it and see what it generates in terms of new thinking. In the United States, I'm aware of, and I think around the world today, there's a lot of divided opinions, both political and cultural. This divisiveness, how can we heal that? How can we bring people together? So question storming is a way for us to respectfully listen to opinions of people that have ideas that are different from our own. And I encourage you to try to do that, which is not always so easy. I used to have dinner parties and they'd say, well, we can't talk about politics. And I'd say, well, why not? That's, you know, those are our values. It's not just a political party, it's our character and what we care about. So I encourage you to do this question storming in your own community. And if you need any help, Pete and I are available to help in any way for you to set it up or to think about the right question to start with to get the ball rolling. I'd like to leave you with a quote from Buckminster Fuller. He's been an inspiration in my life since I was a kid. And he says that you never change things by fighting the existing reality. To really change something, you must build a new model, and it makes the existing model obsolete. So I look forward to building new models with all of you. I want to hear more about what you're doing and what you're up to in terms of especially in the mental health arena, but in all your walks of life. It's a great group of people with diverse ideas, and it's been a pleasure to be with you today. Brilliant. Pete, do you have a final word?
Yep. Well, I've got a lot to add. That was a pretty spectacular session there, and it's not often you get onto a call where literally sometimes I've been working events and all sorts of things for decades, and I always say anecdotally, you know, you get to the point where the chairman says, you know, have I got any questions? And you get that wonderful pregnant pause in the audience, which is you're never quite sure whether it's just no questions or whether nobody quite knows to go first. It's not too often you find yourself in a situation where you just can't stop the flow. And actually, that's where we've been today. So thank you all so much for your enthusiastic interaction. That's how I'll phrase it and leave it. This mental health thing, we do follow through. Kay is chairing a further follow-up in our event next month around mental health as an international issue, which I loved that Kay, after we were talking about the Gloucestershire one, he said, do you what? so anybody who, I suspect there might be a good resource bank here, Kay.
Just be careful with Pete, because he asked you to do one small thing and then suddenly...
So we're looking for input for that, but mental health, it's a big old issue, and yes, I just will here in Gloucestershire, which of course, if this is what this is about, I'm quite sure we'll pick up, and for those of us on the screen who are here in Gloucestershire, it may be something we want to roll forward with. We do question storming each time we do one of these, and we're looking at climate when it goes international next month, and that's a whole other issue. If you want to come and get a bit involved with that, let me know. That's it, really. Thank you so much, everybody, for being involved. And I think we'll probably sensibly call it a day there, because I'm sure we're all fairly shattered. But thank you. Sandra.
Pete, you'll send this recording will go out from Jill? at some point?
So we will have both recordings available to this group, and we will send you the link for both. The earlier one, the question storming one, will not be a public link. We don't object to it being shared with the right people, so don't treat it as a state secret. But bear in mind, obviously, people are sort of burying their souls a little bit with those questions, and sometimes you ask things on screen and you go, did I really just say that? So just be cautious with that. This, though, obviously has been a publicly viewable, and there are a few people watching it on screen as we speak, and that'll be out on the public domain. So once they're through, Jill, one of my colleagues, who some of you know, some of you don't, Jill processes all these things in the background, does a great job. They tops and tails them, tidies it up, put a screen on the front and back, and then we publish them up on YouTube, and then we've got a YouTube link we can send out. So we will do that in the coming days.
Thank you.
So thank you, one and all.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Take care,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Everyone.